Welcome to Question Mark, the podcast, exploring the greatest story ever told with open minds and open hearts.
We light it up, we won't come down, and the sun can't stop us now. Watching it come true, it's taking over you. This is the greatest show, where it's covered in all the colored lights, and the runaways are on in the night. Impossible comes true, it's taking over you. This is the greatest show.
Hello and welcome to Question Mark, a fortnightly podcast about Mark's Gospel. Some say it's the greatest story ever told. I wonder whether you agree. We're very pleased to have you with us today, whether you visited before or it's your first time. My name's David Payne and I'll be your host for this, which is the 37th episode of our journey through Mark's Gospel. So we're well over halfway now. And today we are delighted to have Kirsty Asher with us. I haven't met Kirsty before, but I believe you know Stef and his family well. Do you want to introduce yourself, just say a bit about yourself and maybe why you agreed to be a guest on the show and what your connection with Stef is?
Yeah, so my name's Kirsty Asher and I first met Stefan's daughter Fifi, Genevieve, in 2005 when we started at King Edward's together. It was little 11-year-olds and I'd never been taught by Stefan before. Well, I'd never been taught by him throughout my time at King Edward's up until sixth form, where Fifi and I were both in his English class together. And it was 2 wonderful years of literary analysis, textual analysis, and I'd always wanted to be taught by him because he was sort of so well known as a brilliant English teacher, so creative and open-minded, and it was a wonderful 2 years. And Fifi and I obviously still very, very good friends. Fifi now also knows my boyfriend, and she's very good friends with him as well. So I have never studied the Bible in depth before. I wasn't raised Christian, but I've always been very intrigued in Christianity. At the moment, I generally find my interest in Christianity stems towards a lot of its archaeology and its artwork. I'm very interested in Romanesque architecture and things like that. Iconography, those kind of things fascinate me a lot. So I'm very excited to get in depth with this passage and speak some more, do some textual analysis.
Brilliant. What do you do have you got a day job?
Yes, my day job. I am an archive researcher, actually. I work in documentaries at the moment. On the side, do a little bit of film criticism. I do enjoy that. And again, analysing text. It's a different kind of text, but it's on the screen. I do that when I can, but obviously it's a bit more difficult to hold down a day job doing film criticism. So archive research is my day job,
Fantastic. Well, it's great to have you on the show. Thank you very much for that. Stephen Smart, we've just heard you're a retired English teacher, actor, author, spiritual director, leader of retreats. I don't know whether I've missed anything.
No.
I've been trying to think of some questions for you, and I've been wondering, since you started Question Mark alongside your I Am Mark presentation, have you changed anything about the way you present any of the scenes? I mean, today's scene maybe, or...
How interesting. You should ask that, because just the other day I was in a performance and I decided that I would change something. Not that anyone would have noticed necessarily, David, but having done the Question Mark podcast with you now for nearly 37 episodes, you say, I've realized more and more
15 or something.
I realize more and more this is incredibly well crafted, and every word was, as it were, none of it was meant by accident. And so this performance I did just a couple of days ago, I was trying to attend to that each word is really important. Listen out carefully. And that made a big difference actually to the way the performance flowed. There's a lot more emphasis and nuance in some of the sentences, more than I'd had in any other performance. And I'm also tempted, and you'll see why in a few minutes, hopefully, to maybe, dare I say it, alter the text. Because sometimes using the NIV, I've noticed that the translation isn't quite accurate from the original Greek. And I think that can be misleading. So I might I haven't done this, I haven't had the courage yet, but I might scrap out a few words and put the proper words in for my next performance. We'll see.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And I won't ask whether Kirsty was a good student. I'm sure she was excellent.
Kirsty was a brilliant student. I have to say, Kirsty, being with you again, it just brings back all those memories. And, you were the best class I taught. Having said that, I didn't used to tell all my classes the same thing. But you had my daughter in that class. That has to be a good thing. And also everyone else got on so well together, didn't they? And were great friends. It was just an amazingly bubbly and productive and creative class. So really enjoyed those 2 years you mentioned. Thanks so much.
No problem.
Great. We better get on, I think. Okay, letting our listeners into a little secret. Sometimes, quite often even, the passages come out of order. So mainly for Stef's and my benefit, to put today's reading in context, Peter and the other disciples recently recognized Jesus as the Messiah. Then Jesus predicted his death for the first time. Then we had the transfiguration and the healing of a demon-possessed boy. And today we see that Jesus still has his work cut out explaining his kingdom to the disciples. So what's going to happen next? Over to Lucy Warner, who's going to tell us.
Mark chapter 9, verses 33 to 37, New International Version. Jesus predicts his death a second time. They left that place and passed through Galilee. Jesus did not want anyone to know where they were, because he was teaching his disciples. He said to them, "The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill him, and after 3 days he will rise." But they did not understand what he meant and were afraid to ask him about it. They came to Capernaum. When he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the road?" But they kept quiet, because on the way they had argued about who was the greatest. Sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, "Anyone who wants to be first must be the very last and the servant of all." He took a little child whom he placed among them. Taking the child in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me."
Thank you very much, Lucy. I think actually, Kirsty, you know Lucy, don't you? I've not met her, but she's a friend of the show.
She is, friend of the pod.
So let's get on. We're going to look at the passage in 3 sections. In the first part, verses 30 to 32, Jesus predicts his death for the first time. So I thought we'd let you go first as a guest, Kirsty. Do you want to say what you think about this passage, first of all?
Yeah, so this one, I guess as someone, not raised Christian, never sort of really interpreted the Bible in my sort of day-to-day life. I always try to come at a lot of spiritual passages, whether it's in the Bible or other texts. I always try to come at it from a contemporary viewpoint of what this would, how you would interpret this for a modern audience, what it would mean, what it would look like. And I guess it's difficult because in the very literal sense, it sounds almost to them maybe like he's going to end his life purposefully, which is quite a shocking thing to hear in any context, quite a distressing thing, especially for your closest, your nearest and dearest. But then I also, I guess I interpret it a bit more maybe as in a modern or a contemporary context, maybe if you have a higher purpose, whatever context that might be, you maybe have to do something that's quite unpleasant, but it will be for the greater good. And I guess I'm just struggling to think of what in today's world, what that would even really look like. What kind of sacrifice you would be making to that extent. I mean, maybe that just says something about what an incredible sacrifice he did make. I don't know. I mean, what do you think?
It's fascinating, isn't it, Kirsty, to think about it in those terms. I honestly can't think of a modern equivalent like you. There must be people in history who have, as it were, thrown away their lives for the sake of others. I can think of one, actually. There must be many, but probably not to the same extent as what we're looking at here. Yeah, it's fascinating. And I remember there's a guy in a concentration camp, wasn't there, who willingly gave himself up for others. I can't remember the exact situation, but he wasn't a Jew, but he nevertheless he decided that he would take it, the bullet literally for others in that concentration camp. But no, you're right. It's hard to think of an equivalent, I think.
Well, I guess maybe it's better to think of it less in contemporary terms and more in terms of times of great strife or turmoil. I mean, I guess this is kind of what I was thinking of in regards to other things we would discuss later. But I guess in terms of these people being, colonized, being overruled by the Romans, an organization, they've got their own hierarchies, they've got their own ideas of how to live or how to make other people live. I guess that's a sort of situation of turmoil to an extent.
Yeah.
And maybe in that regard, they would maybe be thinking somewhat of ways. I don't know, it's difficult, isn't it? Maybe they would be thinking somewhat of ways in which they could sacrifice themselves for others to live better, not just in terms of Jesus's actions, in terms of other people as well. But I think that's always in terms of, well, especially in terms of World War II, it has always really struck me, I think, the extent to which how many Roman Catholic priests did sacrifice their lives in Poland and France. It really, it's something that really sort of sticks with you when you hear those kind of stories.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you about the shock value here, and I think for me, that is one of the factors that stands out in the whole story. And what's I think is quite interesting in that regard is that the disciples don't seem to have got what he's told them. He says, "I'm going to give up my life for the greater good," as you put it. But they don't understand what he meant. And I'm fascinated by that because it's plain English, isn't it? I mean, it does actually say, I'm going to be given over to the hands, betrayed into the hands of men, and they will kill me. I'm assuming he means he's the Son of Man.
Yes.
But they don't seem to understand. And I think for me, that's one of the most fascinating parts of my new understanding of Mark's Gospel, which I have to say is being helped by my friend John Burnett of the Gospel of Mark workshop, who keeps popping up in this show, either physically or being mentioned. Because it's all about this Son of Man business. It's the issue of the Son of Man that's the bit they don't understand. They knew what the Son of Man was. The Son of Man was an Old Testament figure, so it's a literary figure who represents a person who's given authority by God and who is at the end of time meant to have power and dominion over the whole of creation and every nation under heaven with God's authority. And he's that's in the book of Daniel chapter 7. And so these guys would have known that story. So again, it's a puzzle initially as to why they haven't understood what he means. But for them, the story would have meant something very different to the way he describes it, the way Jesus describes it. For them, the Son of Man ends in triumph, and the Son of Man for them would have probably represented Israel, their nation. And the idea is then that through Israel, God would reign over the whole earth at the end of time. And they would have thought, hey, that's brilliant. That's fantastic. We're looking forward to that. And the fact is, Jesus has appointed us as the new Israel. We're the new Israel. So we're the guys who are going to be in charge. Fantastic. We're really looking forward to it. And then Jesus comes on and says, no, just going to kill me. Hand me over. And it's completely counterintuitive to what they were expecting. So they wouldn't have understood it. And this isn't the first time he's tried to tell them.
No, exactly.
But it's not gone in.
So his explanation doesn't fit into their understanding of what was meant to be going to happen.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, what was meant to be going to happen from their point of view was going to probably happen very soon, because Jesus has been talking about himself as the Son of Man for some time. and they've been given authority by Jesus, and they're thinking, hey, we're in the hot seat, we're in the front seat here of this particular car, we're going to be in charge. And
Right, okay.
and so this news is not necessarily one they can even begin to digest. It's just completely off their radar.
It's interesting. I was just going to say, it's interesting they didn't understand what he meant and didn't want to ask him about it.
Yeah.
So it's not that Jesus says, you still don't understand, as we've had in other places.
Yeah.
It's Mark saying, they still didn't understand.
No, that's it. And I don't know why they would have been afraid, but because I'm not really sure. The only thing I can think of is that the last time Jesus tried to explain this, Peter got it in the ear, didn't he? Because Peter didn't understand that either, and tried to tell Jesus, hold on, Jesus, you've got it wrong. This is how it should be, in the way that I've explained. And Jesus had to rebuke him and say, get behind me, Satan, get in line again.
Yes, I did,
So they were afraid to mention it because Peter got it in the ear last time.
Once bitten, twice shy.
That's it.
But that really helps contextualize the passage more for me, understanding more what the Son of Man actually really means in an Old and New Testament context. And then in that sense, the sort of the appeal of greatness in that regard, and what the greatness of that promised vision looks like, that appeal, I guess, can obscure the reality.
That's a brilliant point.
I think
so in other words, what you're saying, Kirsty, is that if someone were to say to you, Kirsty, I'm going to make you a star, you are going to be on all the posters and you're going to be on all the screens around the world, you would lose your sense of reality, wouldn't you? Your perspective on life. And so the normal aspect of everyday lives, which include a lot of bad things as well as good things, they wouldn't have even dawned on you. You'd be in a different plane of thinking, wouldn't you? And
absolutely.
and pretty deluded as well, if I have to say.
Yes,
not that I don't want you to be over every poster in the world.
No, of course, no. But it is, it's the dream versus reality. And I wonder, actually, this just came to me, and maybe this is a bit out there. I guess if you read it in a sort of environmental context, this idea of saving the world, saving the planet, or saving us, the realities actually of, if you look at what people say about what we have to do, I don't know, to be carbon neutral or something, actually the realities of that, the comforts we might have to sacrifice in order to do that, actually could be quite unpleasant. But then there's the greater good beyond that.
That's true.
That's quite interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
It'd be good to know if our listeners have any ideas, any thoughts about parallels with today's situations. Maybe that'll come up a bit later as well. Shall we move on to the second section?
Yeah, absolutely.
So in the next section, verse 33 and 34 is about the fact the disciples have been arguing who's the greatest. Do you want to go first this time, Stef?
Yeah, I mean, I think bearing in mind what I said about the Son of Man passage, it's my impression that these guys are interested in power, which is probably the wrong thing. And from Jesus's point of view, that's not what he's interested in at all. It's probably the opposite, as we'll see. And in those days, they would have been quite keen to work out who was the top dog, because it was like an honor-based society, and they would have, it was normal to talk about who's the one who's going to get the best seat at the table, and who's going to get the second best seat, and who's going to get the third best seat. So I'm not sure they would have been arguing about this. The word argue is actually not necessarily the only translation that could be used for that word in the Greek. It's more like something that Luke says in the same episode. It's more like a discussion, more like let's work out who's going to be top then, and who's going to be the second one. So they were all arguing about the kind of order of precedence among themselves, right. the 12 of them. I could mention other stuff. I'd just leave it up to you for the moment, Kirsty. Any thoughts about that little section?
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely something that struck me. Overall, the whole passage seems to talk a lot about respect and how it is earned, or greatness and how it is earned. And I quite, I'm quite interested in sort of the etymology of terms. And I did look up there. Obviously, I don't speak Greek, ancient or modern at all, but I did learn Latin at school a little bit, and so I thought I'd look up the Latin just to see what I could see in terms of, because that word, they'd argued about who was the greatest. I think the word greatest, I got quite stuck on that, and I wanted to know how it had been, because I think great can be. I think that's the thing about the English language is there's certain words that can be interpreted in a million different ways. And greatest could allude to strength or talent, or the greatest friend. It could be any kind of thing. And so I looked at the passage, and it says and the Latin passage, I think it's disputa verunt. Terrible pronunciation, sorry, any Latin speakers listening. But
does that mean disputing? Does that mean?
Well, I guess I guess that must be the origin of where we get that word from. Quis esset illorum major, which is where we get the word major and mayor from, and so both those words connote power.
Is that word mayor? Is it a comparative or is it superlative?
Oh goodness, I don't know.
I think it sounds like it could be a comparative in the Latin, which is, rather than us, it's an and I think
who is greater. Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah,
who's going to be the greater? So that means they weren't necessarily saying who's going to be top dog. They were probably thinking, who's going to be greater than him, and who's going to be greater than him. So it's like an order of precedence. They were working it out. They were having a little chat among themselves about it.
And that actually probably makes a huge difference. Again, that is like the tiniest sort of, and that's the thing about Latin, I guess, is there's so many different functions, and I can't remember what they're called, but I just thought it was interesting with the word mayor, like linking etymologically to the words major and mayor, and how those are very much to do with rank, and power and hierarchy, and I thought it was very interesting. But that chain is that just linked into what I was thinking about the third passage as well, the idea of a chain sort of passing down, or something being something by proxy. I don't know, something but
intriguing. Well, I mean, I just wanted to say, David, before we maybe go on to that passage, and do you notice, Kirsty or David, what it says? It says that word road, and it says immediately afterwards on the way. And I think in the original Greek, that word would be the same. So basically the NIV translators have changed the word slightly, just so they can give it a bit of variety, I guess. But actually, the way is a very important word in Mark's gospel. It means the faith, discipleship. It means probably the church. So sometimes Mark puts in that word when he wants to talk about us, I mean Christians, that is, and say, this is the faith, this is the way to live. And he throws it in. But of course, in this case, they're having this discussion about who's going to be the greater, and it isn't the way to live. It's totally against what Jesus would say. So it's possible, I wonder, Mark's being a bit ironic here. So to mention the word way twice in as many sentences is like heavily underlining, hold on guys, take note, this clearly does not fit what we should be doing right now.
That's really interesting. That's so fascinating. That's a detail that I would never know at all. In my head, just like, repetition.
Is it also interesting that there's still this distance between the disciples and Jesus, that they argued about? They kept quiet. Yes, because there were secrets. There was a them and us type of thing, and you'd hope there might have been a bit more. Jesus has got his love, isn't he? And doesn't he? Wouldn't he have a really open kind of relationship with them?
I think there might be on different understandings, as I said earlier, of what they're all about. And I think, they may have understood that Jesus didn't quite understand what they understood or didn't get it or didn't approve of it even. So yeah, you're right. It is a bit odd that, and it's so crucial that Jesus gets his message across at this point, because it's very close now. He's going to go to Jerusalem, and he knows he's going to die. So he's got to get this message across as to why he's doing it. And it's a real tragedy that they haven't really got it. Instead, they're not even thinking about his death in this passage, are they? The bit we're looking at now, they're thinking about themselves. It's just completely at odds with what Jesus is talking about.
Of it, or as a sort of observer, that one of the main things I've taken away from observing Jesus' story and the story of his life as told in the Bible is that it did always feel like, to me, seeing his interactions, hearing about it in various different forms as well. I mean, I was talking to Fifi about Jesus Christ Superstar is one of my favorite musicals ever, and I think what I found what I found so sad in that context, but I think in the biblical context too, is there does seem a lot of the time to be a disconnect, and like the apostles are just so eager for something, and putting that along with Jesus's melancholy, his obvious melancholy for knowing what's going to happen to him. I always found that so sad, and I always found it sort of almost like, why aren't you listening to him?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not just listening to him. Why aren't you making sure to take on board what he's saying, for the sake of passing on the message as well, for the sake of being the next greater, or whatever, or the next chapter, I guess, for Christianity. For me, that always felt quite sad.
What do you guys think about the relevance of what we've discussed so far for not necessarily the modern world in general, but perhaps for the church? I mean, is there a message here for the church, do you think? Any thoughts?
Well, I guess fixation on hierarchy is, it's always been something that has plagued the church, and it's, particular, I guess, Roman Catholicism, I'm thinking back to the 16th century, 15th century, the way that politics just intruded on Christianity in a very sort of alarming and unpleasant and violent way sometimes. I think it's always something for, any spiritual organization should be thinking about it constantly. Any organization generally really should always be thinking about attitudes to power or greatness or hierarchy.
Absolutely, there's a warning there, isn't there? That I mean, it's.
Shall we move? Go
on, carry on, David. Sorry.
Do you want to move on to the next section, because it kind of flows into it, doesn't it? So in the third section, the last 3 verses, Jesus teaches them and starts by saying, if they want to be first, they must be the servant of all, which I guess comes as a bit of a shock. Kirsty, do you want to speak to that? I think we were talking before, and I think we're all a bit confused about this, aren't we, really? Let's see where we get to.
I think it's that, to me, very much speaks to, I think a lot about this. I think for me, it comes into politics, I guess, because that's my main sounding board for something to do with power. And I think a lot of time politicians, I think a lot of the time they think of power as something that's very fun, or something that's to have a lot of enthusiasm for yourself about, when really it is about serving and like guiding people, looking after people, being there for people. That is serving, whether it's from a position of power, or whether it's like, or whether you actually are like a carer for someone, physically caring for someone. You're serving them in some way for their benefit. It shouldn't necessarily be about your benefit or how you will be accepted or welcomed or received for your greatness, So that for me, that feels like the sort of the pinnacle of this passage. I think that really it's been building until this point, and now Jesus says it, and they're like, oh, that's us told. Oh no, have to rethink everything now.
I love the way you've just really captured the passage so intuitively, and you've used the very words that come from the passage about receiving and so forth. That's brilliant. I totally get it, that it's this whole, I would call it a bit of a disease, like a malaise of wanting to be top gets in the way, doesn't it? And the focus isn't on service, it's on our own betterment. And I can't say I'm free of this particular disease. It's something that affects us all, I guess, to some extent, the competitiveness angle of things. But actually, Jesus is looking for something very different, isn't he? Some of the purer motives than that.
Yeah, and that's what makes him so charismatic, such a fascinating figure.
Yeah.
I actually rewatched only bits of it, but I think actually Reverend Poppleton was the one that showed it to us in the first instance, was The Miracle Maker.
Oh yeah.
The stop motion animation, which again, like I said, I'm non-practicing. I was never raised in the Christian faith, but that show for me, something really struck. I don't know, something stuck with me about that show, and I think maybe it's the way Jesus is shown in that. It's so laid back. He's so sort of take everything as it comes, and he's just so friendly and open, and nothing. Well, I mean, obviously things anger him, but people don't necessarily shock him. Their lifestyles or their sins. He's just really liked that aspect of him. Sort of, it's almost what I see in a different way, but I see that in terms of William Blake, where he had this sort of, he was so sure of his path that everything just kind of fell into place. I mean, obviously Jesus had like moments of complete, obviously Gethsemane, he had huge doubts and panic and worry and fear, but in those days of him teaching, there's just this wonderful sense of everything is collected for him in that place. He really knows where he's going.
Yes.
I don't know, there's something about that that's really comforting, I think.
It's very comforting, isn't it? And it's also very rare, I would say, isn't it?
Exactly. When you meet people like that, it's powerful. Definitely.
It is, that's right, yeah. And someone who's untainted as well, who hasn't got this kind of agenda of wanting to better himself. It's completely self-sacrificing, literally in this case. Wow, I love that understanding of Jesus. I think that really chimes with me. I wish I could learn from that when I come to performance. I think it's really important to always give away that sense of calm authority that Jesus
I think
has.
you capture that extremely well in the performance. I think.
Okay,
and I think you do that in your teaching as when you were a teacher. I think that's what was so powerful about your teaching as well, was that there was a very much a sense of you knew what you wanted to impart. You knew you wanted us to have our own thoughts, but you very much knew the sort of place we were going with the text we were analysing. So I think that's very much something that I can reassure you now that's something I think you've got and take it.
Oh, thank you. Oh, it's so sweet. Oh, it's lovely to have you on the show, Kirsty.
I wonder whether in your lessons you ever brought a year 7 child along and said, right, you've got to be like one of these. I just wonder what Jesus is. Why has he brought a child along? Why does he need a visual aid?
What's going
question.
On here? Very good question. I mean, I think this is the point. I mean, to be honest, David, I think before we answer that question, we have to look at what just happens beforehand. And for me, that's the bit that's really hard. So let me give you the traditional version, as far as I understand it, of verse 35. So Jesus calls the 12, that's what it says. And then he says, if anyone wants to be first, he must be the very last and the servant of all. So traditionally, and I don't say I'm disagreeing with this, and this is the way I've performed it. Traditionally, he's reversing the idea of what it is to be first. They think being first is being in charge. He's saying, if you want to be the best, what you need to do is be a servant, okay? And then, in order to answer your question, the traditional view of the little child is, yes, and here's an example. If you can welcome a little child, as in this child, in those days, a child would have been a nobody, a non-entity, wouldn't have any legal status. Half the children died before the age of 5. They were worth pretty much nothing. But if you can receive a little child, then you're doing the sort of thing that I approve of. That's the sort of attitude you need to have. I wish that were what I now think.
Oh, okay.
Because I realized that potentially, and there may be listeners, and Kirsty, you might disagree as well, who will think, hold on, no, I don't agree with this. But honestly, looking carefully again at these words, if anyone wants to be first, it says in the NIV, he must be the very last. It doesn't actually say that in the Greek. It doesn't say must be. That's been made up. Someone's had to try to understand the phrase and come up with must be. It actually says, if anyone wants to be first, he will be the very last and the servant of all. Now, that kind of changes things slightly. And so you could, I'm not saying you should, but you could interpret that phrase as follows. If you want to be the first, what will happen to you is that you'll end up being the very last. The original Greek says, you will be the very last of all and the servant of all. And that means if you decide that you want to be top dog, well, that will end up in your demise. You'll end up being the bottom dog, actually. And you'll be worse off than slaves. You'll be worse off than Gentiles. What's Jesus talking about? I think he's talking about the fact that it's pride comes before a fall. And God, it says in 1 Peter, I think, God opposes the proud, but he raises up the humble. So there's a sense in which Jesus might be underlining the fact there's actually, it's not a great plan to try and be the first, because you'll end up the last. And I think that does fit in with other parts of the gospel, which brings up the child thing again.
Yeah.
Why is it bringing the child in? Phew. I could give you an answer, but are you happy for me to carry on?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because to me, that's the sort of thing where I'm sort of thinking, yeah, like you say, the translation must just be working extremely hard there to try and interpret what the original passage said.
Yeah. I mean, I think the child comes in. I mean, wherever we can all agree, I'm sure the child stands for, being humble is like when you can receive a non-entity, and Jesus makes it so it's so important to Jesus. He actually says, if you receive a non-entity in my name, for my sake, you're actually receiving me. I put myself alongside the worst, the most valueless person in the world. Those are the people I identify with, and so does God, by the way. So if you receive the person who no one else wants to chat to, the person everyone else ignores, the non-entity, the one who isn't very fabulous or famous, the one who's got the least status, if you can receive that person, you're receiving me, you're welcoming me. So I think we can all agree that's what he means. But why he says it is another matter in this context. And I mean, my friend John would say something like, it follows from the previous bit about ending up the worst, the servant of all, because if you are in that position, sadly, if you end up being in that position, well, luckily for you, you won't have to worry about receiving the other non-entities. And that's a grace to you, because if you can do that, God's going to be what you receive as well. And that's a fascinating idea. I don't know if anyone who's listening or you guys followed that. And I'm not sure I followed it, frankly, but that's John's idea. And I can see how it might work, because there is a problem with the translation, as I say. And unless you understand that, you can't really take the NIV at face value.
We're talking a lot about words today, aren't we? A single word can change the whole meaning, or adapt a whole meaning. What does this mean for us then? Does it change how we should live? Does it change things for us today?
Yeah. Do you want to go first, Kirsty?
I think again, like I said before, I think it's that sort of thing where this should be something we're constantly thinking about anyway, regardless of what generation you live in, because it's such a true and honest message, and I guess a lot of people, maybe they do struggle to see the worth of not what's the word, being self-serving or,
Yeah.
or individualistic.
Yeah.
And certainly, I think, especially with the work I've done with people I've met, I've witnessed a lot of, like people, a lot of social climbing, or a lot of people, especially in performance, in acting, I've seen a lot of people who are not afraid to put themselves out there and really, but sometimes shunt other people out of the way in order to get where they are. And I used to get told a lot, if you want to go into this industry, you have to understand it. It's quite brutal, it's quite cutthroat. And I really realized at a certain point, and I'm still realizing it, it's the sort of thing of witnessing that action, especially witnessing social climbing, things like that.
Yeah.
It's so not what I care about at all. And I'm happier for it. So much happier for it.
That's really lovely.
Yeah, it just I'd rather take forward the friends. That's the thing. I think ever since I've been so young, friends have mattered so much to me. My family always say, "Oh, you loved school. You absolutely loved going to school. You never wanted to miss a day of school." I'm like, "Yeah, because I got to see all my friends." And and that's just those things. That's when you remind yourself of those things in life, then you do remember that you sort of will be blessed in a way. Even if you're not a spiritual person, you will be blessed.
Exactly.
You will find whatever kind of real satisfaction it is that you're searching for, whether that's spiritual or social. I think if I hope it doesn't sound condescending, Kirsty, but if Jesus was here, I think he might say something which he actually does say in Mark's Gospel just a little bit later on from this. He says to a guy who says something equally insightful as you, he says, "You are not far from the kingdom of God," he says to this guy. That's a fascinating comment. That's so powerful. Goodness me. I think those sorts of, when I think of Christianity, when I think of Jesus particularly, I think maybe not necessarily Christianity at all. When I think of Jesus particularly, these are the kind of ideas, these are the kind of lessons, the kind of ways of living that I think everyone should hold dear. And in that sense, though I'm not a believer, I've always been fascinated by Jesus as a person and what he taught and what he said. And you don't necessarily need to be Christian to really have those values part of your life. And it's sort of, that's where my like I said at the beginning, my interest in Christianity sort of flows forward in my life, kind of thing.
That's beautiful.
That could be a really good way to wind up. We're running out of time, I'm afraid, as we do. Has either of you got a last thought in that?
No.
Anything else you wanted to say or you didn't get a chance to bring up?
No, I think it's been a wonderful conversation.
That was absolutely super. Thank you so much. Well, Kirsty and Stefan, thank you so much for taking time to share your thoughts with us. It's been a lot of fun, as it always is, sharing thoughts. And we've enjoyed having you with us too, lovely listener. We hope you'll check out the website, iam-mark.com, and the Facebook community. Please do join us again or listen to previous episodes, which can be found wherever you usually listen to podcasts, and even on YouTube if you'd like to see our faces. We'd love you to like and subscribe, obviously, and tell your friends if you've enjoyed today's conversation. Well, that's all we have time for. It's time to say goodbye from Kirsty Asher.
Goodbye.
Thanks for coming, Kirsty. Goodbye from Stefan Smart.
Bye-bye.
Great to have you with us. And until next time, goodbye from me. Goodbye.
If you enjoyed this episode of Question Mark and don't want to miss any future episodes, be sure to click on the subscribe button. This also means other people can find the podcast and join the conversation too. We'd also love if you could leave a review so we know what was good and what we can improve for future episodes. If you want to find out more about I Am Mark, Stefan Smart's solo word-for-word dramatisation of Mark's Gospel, go to www.sleek.bio/IamMark, where you can sign up for free for his newsletter and a whole host of other goodies. Join us and our special guests next time, where we'll continue to explore the greatest story ever told together. If you want to get involved with the podcast or have any questions or comments in the meantime, please do get in touch using the I Am Mark social media channels. We'd love to hear from you.
We light it up, we won't come down, and the sun can't stop us now. Watching it come true, it's taking over you. This is the greatest show, where it's covered in all the colored lights, and the runaways are on in the night. Impossible comes true, it's taking over you. This is the greatest show.